Good morning. My name is Eric Carlson. I am the younger brother of Frank Carlson, who was murdered by Angela Pavaggio on April 18, 1974. Annette Carlson, who was tortured and savaged by Angela Pavaggio, is my sister-in-law. I would like to thank the Board of Parole for the opportunity to speak today. I'm appearing today on behalf of my brother, who is not able to appear for himself. I'm here to request the Parole Board deny Angela Pavaggio parole and to defer the next parole consideration for 15 years. It is still incredibly difficult for me to talk about any of the details of Frank's brutal murder on that horrible night of April 18, 1974. A summary of those events has already been provided to the members of the board here today. I'm making the assumption that the horror and savagery exhibited by the inmate over the course of the hours spent at the home my brother and his wife shared has already impacted you. There is no need for me to describe these events again in detail. I will tell you, though, that my family was fully aware, and each of us had to live with the knowledge of what Pavaggio did to Frank, pulverizing my brother's skull beyond all recognition. We have provided the parole board with correspondence from the first responders, members of the police, fire, and EMT squads that came to help that night. All of these heroes cite the violence of the crime, the horror of what they encountered, and how that event has remained with them to this very day, some 46 years later. All of them tell you they have never seen a scene of such utter criminal devastation, nor felt sadness of such a monumental quality. Prompted regularly by these hearings, my family has had to think about what my brother's final agonizing moments were like, and the force it took for Mr. Pavaggio to do that to him. I want to tell you who Frank was and how important he was in my life. Frank Carlson was more than my older brother. He was my hero. For me, our 9-year age difference made the relationship between us special and unique. While our parents provided both of us all of the love and support so necessary to raise a child, my brother was my life guide. From a very young age, he helped me to process the events around me, to provide wisdom, and to decipher the world. My brother helped me to become who I am today. We are children of San Francisco. We go back 4 generations on our mother's side. Frank met his wife Annette when our family was a member of Ebenezer Lutheran Church on West Portal Avenue. Our dad worked for United Airlines, and his job was to keep United's fleet of planes in top shape. He taught us precision, accuracy, and mechanical skills. Our mom had 3 careers. First, as a registered nurse. When I was in elementary school, she became a retail store manager for a Bay Area chain. At age 65, she became a staff assistant to Congressman Tom Lantos, a legend of the House of Representatives. I was born December 24, 1957, Christmas Eve. Even before his death, our mother liked to recount the story of our parents bringing me home from the hospital. According to family legend, after getting settled, the first thing our mother did was to place me in Frank's arms. "My baby brother is the best Christmas present I will ever get in my entire life," he would exclaim. What a short life it would be. We had a very ordinary San Francisco childhood. Our parents loved us both and provided us the necessary moral grounding and life skills required to successfully navigate the lives that lay ahead of us. We were taught all the basics, the golden rule: it is better to give than to receive. Love thy neighbor, the virtue of hard work. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The dignity and grace inherent in every individual. These are beliefs to which I still subscribe. But I am not a religious person. This event caused me to question many things, and whatever faith I may have possessed is also a victim of these crimes. Who could believe in a God that created Angela Pavaggio? Protestant theology is still meaningful to me, though, and I subscribe to many of its precepts. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not kill. From a very young age, I looked to my brother as my protector. A few months ago, I took some time to go through old family photos to support a website we created to tell people Frank's story. One photo I found is Frank, probably around 12 or 13 years old. He's at the bar mitzvah of one of his grade school friends, Charlie Langsam. The Langsoms lived across the street from us. Mr. and Mrs. Langsam were Holocaust survivors. One day I asked my parents, "Why does Mrs. Langsam have a tattoo with a number on her arm?" My parents were stunned by how to answer the question, given I was only 7 years old. My 16-year-old brother jumped into the void. He explained to me about the Nazis and the concentration camps like the ones the Langsams were in. I was scared about what I heard, and he could tell. At one point in our conversation, I exclaimed, "But what if it happens again? What if there's another war?" "Don't worry about that. I will never let anything happen to you." And that is why I miss my brother, and why I am shattered that instead something very, very bad happened to him, and there was nothing I could do to prevent it, or to make his departure from this world less painful than what he endured on that terrible April night. For my brother, I think my presence in his life was a link to innocence and a happy childhood he could still vicariously enjoy by having me around him. He was always buying me things that he himself had technically outgrown: Matchbox and Hot Wheels cars, comic books and Mad magazines, board games. He took me record shopping with him and was always trying to educate me about music. He and his teenage friends spent weekend nights at the Fillmore, Avalon, and Winterland ballrooms in San Francisco, seeing all the great bands of that era. I was looking forward to joining him at those places once I was old enough. As the years went on, Frank would continue in the role of my guide and protector. By 1968, he had moved out of our family home and was attending San Francisco State. He wasn't around to babysit, but he would frequently drop by our house after school or on the weekends to take me along with him on some kind of errand or expedition. I would ride shotgun in his beat-up old Mustang as we went places in the Bay Area I never would have gone at age 11 or 12 had it not been for him. The wrecking yards of China Basin, where he was always on the lookout for spare parts to keep his car running. The Mexican restaurants of the Mission. Free concerts and events in Golden Gate Park. If I know my way around San Francisco today, it is because my brother taught me every street, every road, every freeway on-ramp or off-ramp, and the viability of shortcuts that still work for me to this very day. Being with him was always exciting, very adult, and sometimes even a little bit dangerous. When we were back from our day out, he would drop me off at home, look me in the eye, and give me very specific instructions. "Don't tell Mom and Dad where we went today." By my teen years, our relationship was changing. We weren't talking about the latest TV episodes of The Monkees or Star Trek anymore. Our conversations were becoming more deep and more adult. He bought me books by his favorite writers, people like Camus and Bradbury and Vonnegut. Frank was a movie fan, so he would take me to see all the great R-rated films of the 1970s, like MASH, or Godfather, or Deliverance, films that required minors to be accompanied by a guardian. Frank and Annette were beginning to collect art. I learned about Escher, Lautrec, and the Impressionists. We finished our evenings at Tommy's Joint or at pizza places in North Beach. We talked politics, the futility of the Vietnam War, or the hideousness of the Nixon administration. He was teaching me to drive a stick shift, using the BMW he bought to replace the old Mustang. He was giving me advice on girls. I spent a lot of time with Frank and Annette as a third wheel, and it is from them that I learned what romantic love really is. Frank graduated from San Francisco State in 1970 with a degree in English and journalism. He wanted to be a writer, and before his death, he was submitting articles to local papers and interviewing for a job at Rolling Stone magazine. He had a full-time job with Safeway, a mortgage, and a car payment. He and Annette were thinking of starting a family. They were adults, and I was in line right behind them. I could sense our relationship was evolving, and I was looking forward to knowing my brother as an adult from the perspective of being an adult myself. In 1971, Frank and Annette married. I was my brother's best man at his wedding. I remember the day he asked me to stand up for him. I was thrilled and honored. I remember telling him that I wanted him to do the same for me when that day came. And sadly, that never happened. Frank Carlson was my guide and my role model. And on April 18, 1974, he left this world through no choice of his own. That date, April 18th, has significance in the minds of many San Franciscans. As a historical footnote, it is not only the date that Angelo Pavaggio wreaked unspoken horror on my family, it is also the date of the Great Quake of 1906 that killed over 3,000 people. The fact that both events happened on the same day has never been lost on me. In the years after it happened, our mother would compare the events of that day to a bomb going off. The immediate victims of that crime were Frank and Annette. Explosive shrapnel scarred the rest of us, and the ring of people affected is a wide one. After this event, our parents would never be the same. If you were to ask me to tell you what the impact of this event was on them, I could only describe what Angelo Pavaggio did as truly heartbreaking. He broke our parents' hearts. Perhaps that's not a crime, and we've already heard in great detail the horror of the actual crimes Mr. Pavaggio committed that night. But I will make the claim that the crime of heartbreak is every bit as profound, cruel, and hurtful as the crimes he committed against my brother and his wife that awful night. The morning after it happened, the police requested a family member go to the morgue to identify Frank's body. Our father took on this responsibility. It would be many years after the crime before he could talk to me about that day. He only said one thing to me: I did what I had to do. Our father was never the same person after that awful event. For our mother, it was different. She channeled the rage inside her in productive ways. She organized people and worked to change the laws surrounding victims' rights. In the 1980s, hearings like this were an annual occurrence for our family. She worked in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento to give voice to people like us, caught up in a system that seemed heartless and complex and designed to make us want to give up. She found meaning working as a staff assistant to Congressman Tom Lantos as an advocate for military veterans, a role she would hold for 25 years until she finally retired at age 90. For me as a teenager, I found the easiest way to deal with this event was to put it away somewhere very deep inside of me. I would take it out only if I had to. I never spoke about it. In 1975, I went off to Stanford University where I could make new friends and never have to deal with the sadness inside of me. Like any teenager with a big problem, I found the easiest way to deal with it was to not deal with it. Fitting in with new friends required subtle re-engineering of my family history. If I was ever asked about my background, I became the lucky only child who received the full attention of his parents. The last thing I wanted to do was share this event with people who were becoming close to me, for fear of scaring them away with the inherent horror of the story. And that worked for a while. But I found my inability to have those conversations with people ultimately self-defeating. Over the years, I've told my friends that I never wanted this event to define who I am as a person, but I've also sadly come to realize that this event is as much a part of me as being left-handed or having green eyes. Ignoring it is not an effective strategy, and sharing it is not an easy task for me or the person who hears it. Fortunately, I am surrounded by people who understand the impact this event has had on my life. People like my wife, who is here today at my side. I need to emphasize to you, she has taken this event and made it as much a part of her own identity as any human being can do, and I love her for eternity. I am also surrounded by friends who know there is no way they could ever replace my brother, but they also understand how their presence in my life helps fill up the hole in my soul that Angelo Pavaggio created. I hope by now you understand the effects of my brother's loss on me, my family, and the wide circle of friends that surrounds us. Perhaps the biggest result of Frank's death has been felt by anyone impacted by Frank's life unlived, the good works undone, and the sadness that descended to fill the void left by his death. Frank Carlson was a good, kind person with nothing but love for his fellow man. Had Mr. Pavaggio rung Frank's doorbell and asked for help instead of killing him, I have no doubt that Frank would have helped him, because that is the kind of person my brother was. In 1976, Bay Area artists seeded a collection of art at the DeYoung Museum that still exists today. The Frank Carlson Memorial Collection, Achenbach Foundation for Graphic Arts, features the work of significant Bay Area artists. Our family is honored to know that my brother's memory survives in the beautiful art that meant so much to him. A jury of his peers sentenced Mr. Pavaggio to death. If it were the intent of the jury to sentence Mr. Pavaggio to a term of life in prison with parole, then that would have been their sentence in 1974. Instead, his sentence was changed due to the effect of a decision regarding the applicability of the death penalty. Simply put, we are operating under terms and conditions that were not the intent of the jury that determined his sentence. As a result of this, my family finds itself appearing in front of this body, on average, every 3 years since the crime took place. We recount the event ad nauseum. It is almost as if the state of California gave the Carlson family the life sentence to relive the crime year after year. Imagine if the survivors of a plane crash were required by Boeing or the airlines to regularly relive the awful circumstances of their near-death experience. Imagine if the survivors of a tragic automobile accident were required by Ford or General Motors to regularly replay the moments leading up to the wreck that killed their fellow family members. These hearings are no different. What our family has been required to do because of the parole review process is cruel in every sense of the word. In his 46 years of incarceration, we still don't know why Mr. Pavaggio did what he did that terrible night. Along the way, he has only offered lies and excuses that he has been forced to recant. There has been no acknowledgement of the gravity of his crimes to any of us survivors. There has been no attempt at an apology, no expression of remorse. There have been no efforts to atone for his crimes. Aren't these things required of him before he's considered for release? Aren't there absence proof that he is, as the prison system's own comprehensive evaluation found, a sadistic psychopath whose condition is not treatable and is only controlled because he is in prison? Today I have opened up to the members of the parole board about the single most awful thing I have ever experienced in my lifetime. Something experienced at the age of 16, no less. I have shared things with you today that I have yet to do with any professional grief counselor, and I do this gladly in the hope that it will influence your decision. In 2010, as our mother was leaving this world, I reassured her that I would take over the responsibility of attending future hearings and working to keep Mr. Pavaggio in prison. I knew then how much work these events represented and how emotionally draining they can be, but I also knew how important they were, not only for us, but for the people around us. My mother told me each event was different because the story continues to evolve. She told me that the burden would be eased by the support from people around me. She also said as I go through these hearings, I would experience love like I had never known. As part of our efforts to prepare for this hearing, I created a website to tell Frank's story and offer the reader a chance to provide comment to the board regarding the potential release of Mr. Pavaggio into society. The response was humbling and overwhelming. We received close to 3,000 emailed or written expressions of protest, the overwhelming majority from strangers who read the story and were moved to act. Many of them also wrote personal notes of support that were intimate, heartwarming, and extremely emotional. The kindness of strangers is a very real phenomenon. We also received letters of support from people that knew Frank and Annette as children, schoolmates, friends, or co-workers. They shared stories of moments or events that speak to their humanity and the shared tragedy of Frank's loss and Annette's scarring. One of the emails sent to us was from a colleague of Frank's that worked with him at the San Mateo Safeway store, where Frank was the assistant manager. This is what he had to say. I worked with Frank Carlson at Safeway in San Mateo. Frank was well liked by the regular customers and the fellow employees. He was one of those special people that everybody liked, probably because Frank genuinely liked everybody. When he spoke about his wife Annette, you knew he loved her because he glowed. He glowed. On the night of April 18, 1974, Angelo Pavaggio, a complete stranger, broke into Frank and Annette Carlson's home. He terrorized them. He beat Frank Carlson to death with his possessions, while Frank did what he thought was right to try to protect himself and his wife. He pulverized his skull with a ferocity and an intensity that defies description. He beat him to death, and the glow, all the beautiful light, drained out of him, and then the darkness took over. Angelo Pavaggio shifted his attention to Annette Carlson, the wife that Frank loved beyond words. And his evil continued as he raped and tortured and hurt her to the point where she almost died. He stole the beautiful jewelry Frank had bought for her, including her wedding ring. Then he set their home on fire and left. After he was done, Angelo Pavaggio went home, cleaned up, and went to work. In a few minutes, you will leave this hearing and adjourn to your chambers to evaluate the material presented to you today. And I look to the God I no longer believe in to provide you the wisdom and the empathy required to render your decision, the only decision in this instance that is fair and just. May whatever light remains from that horrible night in 1974 guide your path. Thank you for your time. Okay.